So, welcome everyone. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start to remind everybody to keep themselves on mute unless directly asked to unmute. Also, just because we're sensitive of people bombing these Zoom events, can you please make sure that the name you've registered under matches the name that's showing up on our screens here. If we can't identify you, if it shows up as that you've got a phone number, or I don't know, sometimes there's like a load of numbers that we see and we don't know who you are, you'll be moved to the waiting room and asked to just change the number in there. And then also just to say that if you've got any comments or any questions, please use the chat facility, which is generally at the bottom of your screen in the middle section. And you can then be asked to unmute. Today's event is obviously about Stanley Greaves, the self-described maker of things. And we have a lot of very distinguished speakers. Stanley was born in Guyana in 1934 and is one of Guyana's most distinguished artists, a self-described maker of things and writer. In 1995, at the time of a retrospective exhibition to celebrate Stanley's 60th birthday, Rupert Roopnarine stated, "It may be that no major Caribbean artist of our time has been more fecund and versatile than Stanley Greaves of Guyana." So today's talk is going to feature 15-minute presentations from 6 guests who have been a part of his long and colourful life. We have with us today Major General Joseph Singh, Aubrey Williams, Dr. Dawn Ford Arno, Jocelyn Dow, Therese Haggerty, and Ahini Koama. So a huge welcome to them. Before we go on to those speakers, I just wanted to formally say, Stanley, we wish you all a very happy birthday. And I'm sure at the end of today's talk, people will individually want to wish you that as well, and probably in the chat. But meanwhile, I also wanted to mention Border Bazaar. I've had a few emails with a lot of people asking me if we are doing Border Bazaar this year. So we normally hold a Border Bazaar in the second week of December, and we're doing exactly the same this year. We're going to have Guyanese food and drinks, music. Dr. Michelle Asantewa's organizing a kwekwe for us. There'll be folk singing. We have stalls. I know Rod has got his Kazreep ready. So if anybody's getting ready to produce their pepper pot for this year, you'll be able to get Kazreep from Border Bazaar, but also lots of other things, including books by stallholders like Hansip Books, greetings cards, all sorts of different things. So, but this year, just make sure that you note it's at Draper Hall, which is an Elephant and Castle. So I think last year we did it at the Jomar Centre, and previously we've held it in Tooting Bec. So please note the venue difference. Draper Hall, it's about 5 to, I don't know, 10 minutes max walk from Elephant and Castle station. So that's all about that. If you have any questions about that, then do contact us at guyanaspeaks@gmail.com. And then for those who are new to Guyana Speaks, it's just to say that we've been going since 2017. And if you want to be on our mailing list, again, contact us at guyanaspeaks@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter, JC Westmus, or via Facebook. So our events are also advertised on those different platforms. And that's pretty much it. That's enough of me. I'm going to stop my share. And let me just close that for a second. And my name obviously is Juanita Cox, for those who haven't met me before. I can see in the chat that somebody's asking the question. I also wanted to mention in the chat that Ray Krill had produced a really lovely compilation a sort of composite film about Stanley and his art. So if you have a look at the in the chat section, you'll see a YouTube link that you might want to copy to watch later. And we're anticipating that we'll finish in about 2 hours. So I think that is pretty much it. Somebody is saying, what is kwekwe? Okay, Cassandra, just to say, it's a form of dancing that normally happens around the time that people get engaged, getting engaged to be married, and it involves dance and song. So that's kwekwe, but also there'll be just general kind of folk singing songs that most people are really familiar with. And so before I'm not going to say any more. It's enough. I just want to introduce Major General Joe Singh formally, and to say that we're really very honored to have Joe join us today. He's the Special Assistant to the President of Guyana and Chairman of the Board of the Natural Resource Fund. He was a former Pro-Chancellor of the University of Guyana and Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defence Force. He attended Queen's College, the University of Guyana, and is a postgraduate of the University of Greenwich, the British Army Staff College, and the Royal College of Defence Studies. He's been involved for 5 decades in natural resources management, diversity conservation, and scientific exploration. So yes, Stanley, thank you so much, and over to you. And because you can't hear everybody else clapping, I'm giving you a clap and a warm welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Are you hearing me, everyone?
We're hearing you.
Okay. Happy birthday, Stan, and hello to old friends, and welcome to new ones. I have 15 minutes, so I'd go straight into it. My presentation titled Conversations with Stanley Greaves, Arrow of Achievement, Maker of Things. Stan, thank you for asking me to be on this program. I first met Stanley in the 1960s at Queen's College, so we've known each other now for 60 years. I was doing my own A-levels, and Stanley was the Working People's Art class, and we both were being tutored by the distinguished Edward Burroughs. We continued our engagements when I was Chief of Staff, and he visited to witness parades whenever he was in Guyana. At the Theatre Guild, in written correspondence, particularly I enjoyed his calligraphy. And of course, over the last 5 years, he and I have exchanged over 500 emails. And as Vanda said in a previous engagement, he has been sharing his constellation of multifaceted expertise with me. And I really am very appreciative. Give you examples of my brother. It seems we can be writing forever, which is good because a record is being kept. A great difference from heavy conversations. With our ongoing correspondence, we could publish a book of conversations, a dead practice in Guyana for a long time. And you know, Stanley says, this Zoom thing is becoming a menace to my productive solitude. Everyone now Zooming and sending invitations. I'm being very selective for my own peace and sanity, but it's a great delight to be corresponding. Most appreciated indeed. Another email from him. Dear brother, each generation becomes a product of their time. They have their own learning curve, but we can attempt or remain as watchers. I've reminded some that I experienced slate pencil, lead pencil, common pen, fountain pen, typewriter, fax, and computer. But it's sad to see youth taken up with social media, which I regard as a blight. It affects my own grandchildren. I do not see them with any other pursuits. They're not interested in making. There's no contact with hands-on work. But since 1959, Stanley says he's been keeping journals for his children to read. As a young person, I really felt the lack of knowledge of the history of my parents' families, how they dealt with issues of their times. Nothing has been written. All I know is the little I've been told. I have read your book, which is a good read. Good that you relate to your grandchildren. I hope they pay attention. And he continues in another email, I remember once reading that for a child, an hour is a day is a week is a month, and reversed as we grow older. Other than invented clocks, time is perceived and based on the context of the location. A lovely story he relates of Carl Jung, relates about his first trip to Africa. Saw some men sitting under a tree, thought they were wasting time. He asked and was told they were waiting on the right time to do something. And Stanley, while at Berbice High School, said a thought came to him which he couldn't fathom. For spiritual independence, remember yourself and wait. It was years later reading about Sufism that the meaning came to me. Pay attention to the inner being and not to the ego. E.R. Burroughs' Guyana, Land of the Dolorous Guard, had a profound effect on both of us. Stanley says the message is not only universal, but in a frightening way so prophetic about the politics that accompanied the country's independence in ensuing years. It did leave an indelible impression on my mind from 1951 to this day. This painting I would consider the heart and soul of the national collection, despite its small scale. It has been the single most influential work in the development of my figurative paintings. And he said so in an interview with Mr. Kima McPherson. His conversations with Martin Carter, again, the way in which art offers a model of conversation. He would drop by, Stanley said he would drop by just to talk and whatever. I mean this thing of conversation, to have a conversation with somebody, not just a liming session. In Gemma R. Robinson's article, The Art of Conversation, she writes, art offers models for collaboration, connection, and conversation that reminds us how to understand other voices and other perspectives. And she relates the interpretation of bent using Martin's words and the hatching by Stanley. Conversation that the two of us have had varied, you'll see in the course of my presentation, an amazing array of talents from Stanley and the engagements that we've had from the mortar made from Green Hearts, a series of boxes. And he says, I'm beginning to feel I took the wrong turn at the crossroads, choosing art over designing and building in wood. For me, it's like living a new life within a limited time frame. I'm asked, why the woodwork projects? And I say, they exist because of the joy of making them. Conversations about his knife cabinet. He and I have been exchanging a lot of emails concerning weapons of war, strategies of war, the bows and arrows versus flintlock rifles during colonial times, the Zulus and their assegais, the Gurkhas and their kukri, and the similarities in tactics, strategy and tactics by Roman General Marius and Shaka Zulu. And he says, from early boyhood days, I've been an avid reader of ancient historical battles. I fought with armies all over the place. You'll be familiar with some of his work. I wouldn't dwell on these because I'm sure these will be covered in subsequent presentations, but the fascinating coconut table, the guitar which he made, his design of Christmas stamps in 1974, the metrication stamps of 1982, all of which were subjects of emails. His quantum theory and quantum mechanics. I don't know the wood. I'm sending a sample to a wood maniac, very fine woodwork in Seattle. I asked for it from a neighbor 10 years ago. It was my garage and had fungus growing, which told me it was splitting. Dry rot areas began as I began to work, and I thought of getting rid of it. Then my mother's immortal words: if you don't know, if you know you can't finish it, why did you start? And our conversations on military history. Turns out that he found a book on his shelf, which he thought would be useful to me. I had to tell him that I knew General Rupert Smith since 1977. And he says, he recently saw this on my shelf and thought it might be of interest. Apologies for marks along margins and notes, a reading habit of mine. They would not be there if I had bought the book expressly for you. And then he introduced me to Sufism, pantheism, animism, his interpretations of these. In the case of the Sufism, he says, I became interested in the 1960s and continue to read to this day. Stanley also influenced me to get my own copy of Edgar Shah's The Sufis. It says that the cultivation of the spiritual life, not in isolation, but together with the material, made total sense. It was a revelation to see how much the West benefited from contact with Arabic culture. He also had conversations with my dear wife, Carlin, and I show some of those conversations here, exchanging notes on bread he was baking before and after. Ripe plantains based on the sequence of rigorous instructions, what I call algorithms of baking plantains or frying plantains before and after. Fish cakes. Hello, cousin Carlin. Thanks for responding. I used another salted fish, much smaller than cod, from a Mexican supermarket. I had used cod before, but it was too salty. But I returned it because it's tasty and has more texture. Cutting it into smaller pieces to soak will help in salt removal. Stanley. There are exchanges on garlic pork with vegetables, art in food also. In my prawn curry, the curry was fine, but you could play table tennis with the prawns. One of my daughters and an East Coast friend told me what to do. I'm also making a gutney to mash up the peas to make dal. Exchanges on salmon stew and soup. And we exchange even on what we have for breakfast. Stanley's on the left and my on the right. He actually said that he thought Carlin gave me bake with holes in them. I think he spoke tongue-in-cheek, knowing fully well that they were bagels. Conversations on climate change and his concern not only about rising sea levels and the talk of removing our capital to places like Bartica, but also very upset seeing trash littering the beach, and said we need to ask ourselves, quo vadis? And in the same breath, he said, I know where I am going, to have a drink of hard cider and practice guitar and read. Conversations about food security, natural corn and hot peppers, artwork on the right. I sent him this photograph I took of scarlet ibises in a yard next to ours in Continental Park. And he sent back, Joe, what a remarkable photograph. You can actually see them lower their landing gear. Near my daughter Sonia's home is an open water area where migratory geese like to spend winter. I love to see them coming in and landing in squadron formation one by one in the water to swim off still in formation. Conversations about the pecking order among the avian species, but also their coexistence. The socialization system among the avian species taking turn at feeding from the single mango tree in our yard, which although bearing very prolifically, only one mango was actually being attacked by the birds, and they were taking turns. Kiskadees followed by blue sakis, doves, swifts, butterflies, and insects, including marabuntas. And he says, if only humans would display the same patience and tolerance and cooperate and collaborate for the good of all. This is a fantastic photograph he sent me earlier this week. In fact, last Wednesday, the day of his birthday. It is a National Geographic Picture of the Year. And he said, zoom in and you'll see the zebras. The black images that you are seeing on the photograph there are actually their shadows. But if you look carefully at their feet, you'll see the actual zebras. And I responded, dear brother Stanley, what a remarkable photograph. Shadows move among them. And I sort of took a mickey out of him by taking some photograph of Carlin's garden and saying, my shadow on the orchids and on the vegetable patch. And he sent back saying, hilarious seeing your shadow self in the garden, particularly by the one on the paving stones. Conversations about ancestral influences and the dedication of the workbench to his grandfather Joseph and his father John, and the extent to which he benefited both from his grandfather's mentoring and seeing him as the force behind his woodwork projects and his multifaceted talents based on the influence of his dad. Conversations about family. And here you see a photograph of Sonia and Isabella and Alexander, his grandson, and the pride that he takes in his children's career and the relationship that they've had over the years. Also about Guyanese, what he terms people who are passionate about Guyana and who dedicated their lives. Hilton Lewis being one of them, celebrated his 103rd birthday earlier this year. Hilton has been a great role model for me. I learned what it is to be mindful and helpful in dealing with those in your care as a teacher, lessons in personal conduct, and the relevance of arts to life. Stanley remembers being in the choir of the Teachers Training College under the direction of Hilton Lewis. And you see there his gift to Hilton, which he asked that I deliver on behalf of him to his mentor. Closing off here, Stanley received this Arrow of Achievement. I think he deserves much more than that, and will certainly recommend him for higher awards. But he had misplaced it, and it took him, I think, 20 years in order to get another one. And I was very happy that before his birthday, he was able to get the replacement at the consulate in New York. And this is his nightcap. Ports or wine with cheddar. And in conclusion, I leave you with Horizons, his book of what he calls poems. Horizon was given that title because of my interest in horizons, from the seawall and from the hills and rivers and mountainsides. The horizon for me was a metaphysical experience, something seen but never to be reached. And there you have the poem, or the poem on the left. I sent that to him on his birthday on Wednesday. And he said he had a good laugh because sometimes, having written these poems, he doesn't know who actually wrote them when he reads them years later. Anniversary. A present for you, Stanley, on behalf of today. The celebration is like a one-legged stool that needs a sitter in order to stand. So must you be the sitter and I the stool to recognize this day. An anniversary day spent in stern wonder of a single moment of indescribable meeting. Mutualize forever, make time timeless. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Joe. That was phenomenal. I'm amazed. I saw the presentation come through and I thought, how's he going to do this in 15 minutes? And you've done it in just under 15 minutes, which is fantastic. I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
And thoroughly enjoyed all of that, and I hope everybody's sitting on a two-legged stool. I like that.
Thank you very much.
I like that you introduced that that poem at the end, which was wonderful, and I feel like I learned a lot really quickly. It was very exciting. I want to now. Actually, there's a lot of people on the screen, so can we put our hands together there for Joe Singh, just so that he can see our gratitude, even if he can't hear it. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, and I hope you'll be able to stay on. We're on for a little while, but if you can stay on, that would be brilliant.
I certainly will. The least I can do for my brother. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm now going to introduce you all to Aubrey Williams. The first thing I'm gonna say is that a lot of people contacted me saying, are you feeling all right? Aubrey Williams, I think you made a mistake on the email you sent out. I was like, Guyana has produced more than one Aubrey Williams. So but I just want to say Aubrey was also born in Georgetown in Guyana, but in 1946, and attended St. Stanislaus College, or Saints, where he first met Stanley Greaves in 1958. Stanley taught him art and nature studies at secondary level. Aubrey probably owns the oldest oil painting done by Stanley, which he did in 1955, a gift when he visited Stanley's home as a young teacher. So it's wonderful to have somebody here who knows him so well and has known him for so long. So putting my hands together for you, Aubrey, thank you so much for contributing today's show. So over to you.
Thank you, Juanita. Thank you very much. Actually, Aubrey Williams was my cousin. Painter Aubrey Williams was my cousin. But many people think that he's been reincarnated, not necessarily through me. Good morning, good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. But I tell you, Major General, you're a hard act to follow. That was a wonderful presentation. In view of the time limit, like Major General, I am afraid I typed out more than I needed to. I hate to do that, but it's the only way to get so much information that I want to convey. Stanley, thanks for having me here, and Juanita and Rod as well. I would like to speak to Stanley as a mentor in my life and a mentor of many of my contemporaries. As Juanita said, we met at St. Stanislaus in 1958-59. I remember very distinctly, we were waiting for our art teacher to show up and we had no idea who this person was. And this gentleman came across the street, bent over and plucked a vine, walked into the classroom and said, good afternoon, pinned the vine on the blackboard and then said, draw that. And the boys were all taken aback. Draw that? I mean, to say, we drew battleships and airplanes, but a vine, that didn't make any sense. It was very interesting at the end of the class, comparing how the different students saw the vine and how they compared excitedly each other's viewing of their drawings. And I'd like to think now that that was our introduction to the primacy of the eye. Different ways of seeing things, the same thing. Fast forward to, I would say a few years ago, when Stanley's daughter Fiona organized a small group and we would meet every week with Stanley to discuss the Book of Miracles. And one of the main exercises in the Book of Miracles was how to see and whether we see what we think we are seeing. Because the eye, in a way, sees things the way we are socialized into seeing it, rather than seeing it the way it is. So that's an interesting link in my life. At St. Stanislaus, the priests were very erudite, very impressive, very authoritative. But Stanley was the first generation, I would say, of local teachers, Guyanese, who came into the college. And even among the local Guyanese, Stanley was outstandingly different. There was something impressive, mysterious, unusual about Stanley. Approachable, but at the same time, someone you couldn't quite grasp. He was close to us and he was distant. He, I think, had a great influence on several students, some of whom went on to the art world and to the world of theater and writing. I myself imitated some of the traditions that Stanley was part of by creating a little borough school under my house in North Road. And some of my fellow students came to that under the house school and we painted, much to Stanley's delight. Several of them have gone on to other things, notably Bobby Fernandes, the late Bobby Fernandes, who, as you know, was a photographer and a writer. Mark McQuat, a writer. Billy Newman in Toronto, who's become a Calypsonian and performer. Brian Teixeira, who lives in Carcassonne, France, and is painting. Rudy Amirali, I think, Rudy, you were on line with us here, and Raymond Stone and Michael Lowe, they're all in Toronto and Ottawa and painting. And again, I think that that's a tribute to you, Stanley, in terms of the influence that you've had on so many of us students who met you for the first time in the late 50s at St. Stanislaus. Another reminiscence and an important thing in my life was the fact that Stanley took some of us to camp in Maduini, just outside of Atkinson Field, Guyana Airport today. Taking us 20 boys or so out to a camp away from our parents was a huge responsibility that Stanley assumed. We went into cold creeks, we walked through the bush, we walked through the sandy areas where there was no quicksand, but you could fall and hurt yourself. So that was a major exposure that Stanley gave us. We took risks with Stanley during the camps as well. I remember that one night, several of us decided to try to paint Stanley by taking toothpaste and shoe polish and trying to put a mask on his face, only to see a belt come from under the sheet and whap, whap, licks from Stanley. I see you laughing, Stanley. You remember that, don't you? But Stanley exposed me very much to the wonderment of the interior of Guyana. And I went on with other teachers to ride across parts of Essequibo, sleeping on the beach in Suddy, going down the Pomeroon River, going to Bartica and climbing with an Amerindian guide from the base of Kaitshur all the way up to the top. I think all of that left me with a keen interest and an attraction to the forest. So many years later, as a graduate student, I decided in an uncanny way to choose the Congo as the place where I would do my PhD research. And in the Congo, there was many, many reminiscences of the times in Guyana, going through the Ituri forest in the equator, going down Lake Tanganyika, taking a train across Tanzania to Dar es Salaam at the time when Clive Thomas, the economist from Guyana, was teaching there, as well as Walter Rodney. He was in Dar es Salaam at that time. So I do think that Madiwini was important in my spiritual opening and direction and an attraction to places far beyond Guyana. Madiwini also, I think, had an influence in my attraction to vegetation as a theme in painting. I went on to do some paintings, and one of them, Peas in a Pod, is a bit reminiscent of Stanley's painting in 1959, am I correct, Stanley? Encounters, where you had beans and nature growing out of the beans. And I think very much that was an influence on my seeing and my painting. Stanley, in many, many conversations with me, spoke about the importance of one's inner light and inner self. And I remember walking down the streets of Washington with him, and he noticed that I was looking all around, outside, at people in the buildings. And he said, Aubrey, you're looking too much outside. You need to look more inside of yourself. That's where your light comes from. And I felt he was reprimanding me. But that thought has stayed with me very, very much, that our light and our power comes from within, not from outside. Our validation comes from within, not from outside. And this is a theme that keeps coming back to me all the time. I'd like to close in talking about Stanley's time in America. The first time he came was on a Fulbright to Washington, and he attended Howard University. He stayed with me for about 6 months. And that was another occasion for Stanley to have a profound influence on me. At Howard, he broke into printmaking and sculpture in metal and in glass. And I was privileged for Stanley to give me several of those pieces and the first of every one of the prints that he did at Howard. While at Howard, I noticed that Stanley had a certain ambivalence and indeed perhaps some conflicts with American culture, and especially about identity politics in Howard and in America in general. He was somewhat allergic to hyphenations, African-American, in those days it was Afro-American, or he was allergic to the opening of a women's museum of the arts. Stanley felt we shouldn't be known as a Black artist or a female artist or a woman artist. We should be known as artists or a maker of things. And that is impressed on me always. In his return to America, however, in Fayetteville, I've noticed he's been infused much more by very striking images of racial politics in America. The murder of George Floyd, I think, had a profound influence on him. And now I think he's seeing much more. There's a dilemma of Black Americans in this society, and is much more sympathetic to the contradictions and the difficulties in America. Where is Stanley today, I would ask? I read in The Primacy of the Eye by Roopnarine that Stanley said that when he returned to Guyana from England, he felt he left his soul in the UK. When he was in the UK, he felt he left his soul in Guyana. Here in America, Stanley, where is your soul? It's something I'd like you to respond to later in the conversation. But it's not just you, Stanley, it's all of us in the diaspora. Where is our soul? Exactly. Well, I don't know if I've used up my 15 minutes, but I'll end right there and give others a chance to speak. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. That was really fascinating. Great to hear kind of the influences on you, but also on so many other people like Mark McWatt and, I don't know, Bobby Fernandes. And I hadn't really been aware, but I guess it should have been a bit of, not necessarily obvious, but I should have thought about that, I guess, with Raymond Stone and people like that. I'm also interested in what you were saying about kind of his allergy to these ideas of ethnic absolutism or something, or connections between ethnicity and you know, if you're an artist, you're just an artist. But I'm wondering as well, later on, maybe we could talk about how our different identities intersect with being an artist, and that might be something that's interesting to follow up on. But before we move on, just a huge thank you to you. So everyone who's got their screens on, please just put your hands together for Aubrey and say thank you so much. There is an Aubrey Williams, the cousin of Aubrey Williams. So now we all know, especially for us in the UK who are less familiar with the work of other Guyanese artists that are going on in the States and elsewhere. So it's really a great pleasure to have you here. And I want to move on now to, let's see, Dr. Dawn Ford Arno. Dawn, are you there? Let's see if I can see you on the screen. Fantastic. Thank you. So Dawn is a multimedia artist with an affinity for working with textiles and a graduate of the London College of Music in England, where she majored in flute and piano. In 1970, she was appointed music master at QC, where she founded the QC Still Band Orchestra. For her, music making was integral to the curriculum. Now retired as an educator in higher education and K-12 school systems in the USA, Dawn devotes her time to music making, quilt making, poetry writing, and very importantly, grandmothering. So Dawn, yes, welcome. Thank you so much for contributing to today. And I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. And good afternoon as well, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to read so that I stick with the time. I am humbled and honored to be here with you today, Stanley Greaves, on this celebration of your 88th year on this earth. 88. How blessed you are with the brain still intact, with your wit just as sharp, and your observational powers just as keen. The song Enjoy Yourself is swimming in my head. Growing up in BG, we heard it playing on Radio Demerara almost every day. Enjoy yourself. It's later than you think. Enjoy yourself while you're still in the pink. The years go by as quickly as a wink. 50 years surely did go by as quickly as a wink. It was early 1970 that we met as QC masters. Regardless of gender, everybody was appointed as a master. Under the leadership of then headmaster, Mr. Clement Patrick Yap, former math teacher, better known to the students as Balance. We were fortunate to be at Queen's with him as the head, and for that, I am grateful. I don't know that we would have been able to do what we did and to impact the lives of the boys without Clement Yap as the then headmaster. So for that, thank you, Mr. Yap. Today, I'm here to pay tribute to you, my friend, my late night gaffing buddy, my art advisor, my folk song singing companion, my continual project thinking about project directors and advisor. Thinking about you and what I wanted to say, I decided to get some input about you from some of the QC students of the 70s. Now old men themselves, students that you impacted when they were 11, 12, 13 years old, impressionable little boys. So first, we'll talk about the look, the eye, what they saw, the little boys who were observers just like you. Mr. Greaves was cool. He had an imitation afro and an untamed mustache that concealed lips that hardly moved. He was not much of a talker. His rare utterances were just barely audible. His eyes and his frown did the talking. Serious, stern, humorless countenance, deep. He made no attempt to dress to impress. A quiet disposition with a disarming smile. A man possessed with a deep but characteristically quiet passion to explore the very roots of our Guyanese experience and culture. He always seemed like he had other things on his mind. Next, it was what you did to the boys' minds. Stanley was unimposing. He allowed you to use your imagination. He was very interactive with students. I remember an exam project for which I got a 90 and wondered if it was that good. It was a response to the topic word storm. I shaded my paper all gray, gave some images of waves with charcoal, appearances of rain and lightning with a partial boat. Stanley thought it was worth a 90. I was amazed. He was a fine instructor, a clay master, a sculptor. That influenced my first attempt at working with clay. I washed the clay as much as I could, not knowing exactly what I was doing. I created a model of a man's head. I did a pretty good job. I did this at home in Plaisance and took it to QC over the weekend. It was extremely heavy. There were some students from the training college, the teachers training college, or from the Barreau School of Art that weekend. I don't know which, but when I came to school on Monday morning, my clay head was gone. That was my first and last attempt working with clay. Stan, if you know who stole Agre Duncan's head, I'm sure he'd be happy to know. Stanley Greaves' presence at QC brought about the awareness of the Barreau School of Art. We came to know the expression modern art in that time. There was an awareness of other national artists and their styles of presentation. We are thankful for his journey that intersected with ours, and on this birthday, we wish you all the best, and may you live to see many more. Next, there were unforgettable moments, one in particular being in the presence of a master. Stan had a cool approach to teaching and inspiring his students to love art. A memorable moment was when Stan teamed up with Anthony Phillips to paint those larger than life-size murals that are now installed in the dome of the GBTI, the Guyana Bank for Trade and Industry, that was formerly the Barclays Bank building in Water Street. Those of you in Guyana who haven't seen the work should take the time to visit to see Stan's masterpiece. Stan and Anthony did those paintings after hours in the QC art room. Quite a few students stayed to watch the creation of those masterpieces. Colors were mixed to match one young man's skin tone, and that became the paint that was used for the skin color of the character in the painting. Imagine Enrico Wolford will never forget that it's his skin color that's in that painting. An unforgettable moment. Now the view of Stan as sage, the wise one, from a budding artist. I learned many things from this great sage of creativity. He made space for my own artistic creativity, and that was not just limited to the QC art room. I learned the word pot boiler from Sir Stanley Greaves, at the time 22 years my senior. The pot boiler is a produced work of art to which no other sentiment is attached by the artist, apart from getting it sold quickly. Ostensibly, this is to ensure that the artist had enough money to sustain self and usually emerge from a financial crisis. Artists are usually emotionally attached to their works of art and are reluctant to put a price tag sometimes on them and may not sell them at all. It takes a special and severe mental adjustment for an artist to produce a pot boiler. It amounts to the prostitution of one's otherwise sacred form of exploration and expression. That was from now Pastor Harris, formerly Bumper Harris. Happy 88th lap, Sir Stanley. More light to you the next go around. Well, I learned about pot boiler when I read William Harris's contribution to this piece. So, Stan, I wrote you a poem, and the name of the poem is Stanley Greaves is No Pot Boiler. Our Stanley Greaves was never a pot boiler. Quiet, thoughtful, methodical, cool dude, not much of a talker. A man of integrity, seriously interested in his Guyanese culture. Penknife and wood in hand, spent time as a small boy whittling. He became the artist, the sculptor, the teacher, and the maker of all things good. Our Stanley Greaves was never a pot boiler. Wouldn't just do what was expedient and cut corners. As a teacher, gave his students space to develop their creativity. A man of integrity, seriously interested in his Guyanese culture. Introduced a generation to sculpture, printmaking, calligraphy, drawing, and painting. Gave them experiences, memories to take with them into their own futures. Our Stanley Greaves, now 88, was never a pot boiler. And finally, Stan, my thanks personally to you for always being willing to critique my own work as I ventured into creating visual art. Our collaboration with Things will continue. Congrats on starting your 89th year and teaching the rest of us how to live. Continued blessings, heartfelt wishes for good health and all good things as you continue in this sojourn. Love and light to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dawn. That was really interesting and insightful. When you were talking about sort of unforgettable moments, I was taken back to, I think, December 2014 in Rupert Roopnarine's house when Stanley was there playing, I think, on the guitar, and Camus was on steel pan, and it was just the most glorious Christmas I've ever had in my life, and that's something that will always stay with me. And I'm sure many people have those kind of standout moments that they never forget. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. And if everybody can put their hands together for you and say thank you so much for your contribution, really appreciate it. I am going to move now, I think, to Jocelyn Dow. Perinia, I don't know if you can spotlight Jocelyn so that we can see her on the screen. Jocelyn has given me the very difficult job of not actually introducing her. She said she's just an old friend of Stanley and she doesn't want to be introduced. And Jocelyn, you just need to unmute yourself.
Here I am.
You've got that. I'm loving your glasses. Oh my goodness.
I put them on for Stanley.
Very fitting glasses for Stanley.
Right.
Jocelyn, am I really not allowed to say anything about your background?
You can say whatever you like.
Oh, what I like. Oh, well, that's good. So I just want to, because Guyana Speaks is really about celebrating Guyanese, and I really want to just take the opportunity to celebrate you and to say that you are also, you're a founder and the managing director of Liliana Kane, which is a furniture factory. And to anybody who's in the UK, if you ever go to Guyana, you have to look up Liliana Kane, simply because the furniture that's produced is absolutely beautiful. But more importantly, it's also based on the sustainable use of non-timber forest products. And I just wanted to say, in connection to that Jocelyn is deeply concerned about environmentally sound development and has served as a board member of the Caribbean Conservation Association. She was also appointed to the United Nations Secretary General's panel of eminent persons for the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in September 20. So when was it? I'm trying to remember when, but
2005, I think. 2005, I think.
2005, yeah. She's also founding member of Red Thread, which is a women's collective in Guyana, a very significant and important one, and has been a member of the External Gender Consultative Group of the World Bank. She's also, more importantly, within today's context, a lover and supporter and collector of Guyanese art, and close and long-term friend of Stanley Greaves. And as you can see in the background, she's got the painting behind her. So I love the way everybody's got their settings just right behind them. So Jocelyn, thank you so much. Jocelyn was wonderful when Rod and I were living in Guyana. Jocelyn was my swimming partner. We used to go swimming together, and I just have just so much gratitude that Rod and I owe to you for our time in Guyana. So thank you for joining us today, Jocelyn, and I'm handing over to you.
Thanks. Well, just to clarify, when Anita said, or Rod wrote and said, well, we haven't gotten a bio, I said, well, the bio I have is that I'm Stanley's old friend. I could say backstopper might be a better expression. So Stanley, today I decided to start at the end, so to speak. The painting behind me is called The Rise of the Phoenix. And that is after I had two major fires, one on my birthday where my factory was burned down. And the next year, my home was burned down, home in which Stanley spent many, many years. And I was kind of like, oh, Jesus, how can you have 2 major fires in 2 years running and you didn't set them yourself, kind of thing. So Stanley, I've known when he was a young teacher in New Amsterdam. He used to teach at Burby's High. I was at school, I was in school in town, but he stayed with extended friends and family of my parents and so on. And I think that's where he learned to drink rum. These women could drink, right? And he used to have, in the afternoon, they would have a shot or 2 or 3 or 4. But Stanley said it was just the most amazing experience. You know, New Amsterdam was a small place, everybody knew each other. There was a lot of affection around. And these aunts would, where he boarded at one of them, aunts by not blood aunts, but you know, the extended Guyanese aunts, he would be there listening to the old gaff as they knock back, you know, a bottle or 2. So that's my first kind of memory of him being in that setting. As the years went by and, you know, his own life kind of morphed and we were going through the difficult years of the 70s and so on. Whenever he was what I would call homeless or needed a home of a certain kind, he came and lived by me. And so he lived for a long time on and off when I lived in Murray Street in what is now Cara Lodge. And he would be staying in the room nearby. And I am a pretty crazy person in the sense that I always would throw all my things out in the middle of a room and then kind of lie on it. And Stanley would say, well, what the hell is going on here? What are you doing? I said, Stanley, why does it bother you so much? You know, somebody fix it all back, my clothes on the ground, I was looking for something. He said, you have Amerindian blood in you. This is your equivalent of picking up your tent and moving somewhere else, slash and burn. I said, well, you know, Stanley, it really doesn't bother me. It bothered him terribly. And then one day we sat down at breakfast and he said to me, and I worked it out. I am so disordered in my mind that I need external order. You are so orderly in your mind that you don't care about external order. So you could live in the confusion and I have to have order about me. So here's part of where he lived, which was another room in the house, which is a really big building. It was extremely orderly. And everything about him, you know, the cups, the knives, the forks, the this and that. For me, it didn't matter whether Sunday fell on Monday, kind of thing. So it was really the basis of a long life of friendship about disorder and order. So at the time when I lived there, we had a lumber, I was kind of, I don't know, building houses or something, had lumber behind, but I had a number of very old Guyanese craftsmen who worked there. And one of them was a really magnificent man called Louis LaRoche, who Stanley was very, very attached to. Louis was both a member of the Princessville Orchestra, which was always a dispute in Guyana as whether the orchestra started, the first Philharmonic Orchestra started by Dorothy Tate or Princessville. He was in the house of what was Dorothy Tate at the time, which is where I was living after Horace left. And Stanley, so Louis would be there with his, and taught Stanley to make his first guitar, you know, and in those days we were using hand planes and stuff, no particular machinery. This was really built by hand. And I would say, if there was somebody other than his father who really influenced him into the making of things, I would say Louis would have played a significant role in that. The house was also, of course, always in a state of being renovated or increased or something. So floors were being put down, things were being, don't come in please, floors were being put down, things were being hand done. If you know, the Mr. Pierce, who was another great craftsman there, and Stanley would be completely fascinated by the level of work and dedication to excellence that had to do with wood. and woodworking in Guyana. And I think that as his own pieces have been produced over the years, I would say that it's really, to me, is a celebration of those people's efforts and their dedication to craftsmanship and detail. And this is what was important about it, detail. I've always been in the business of making furniture. In the 70s, I was into woodworking furniture. Those were difficult years politically, things. Oh my God. I was hoping the dog, Stanley, I did not put away the dog because a part of Stanley being here with me, it has been about my animals. So he always had to do with the dogs who are doing quite well till somebody just came here. And to segue into the animals, when he stayed with me, of course, I always had animals, dogs. And lately, when we were in Charlotte Street, which also burnt down, I had a cat, that several cats that came. I didn't get them, they just appeared. And they were completely fascinating. In fact, it is Miro Westmus who brought the most interesting cats to my house, Rod's cousin. And Stanley would come, and there was one particular one who I think he called Cleopatra. This is Stanley, not me. And the cat would every morning bring me a leaf. It was quite amazing. She would come from off the roof, which was a 3-story building, and would bring me a leaf. And Stanley was completely taken over by this cat, who would just do this and then go into a big piece of pottery I had that was done by Stephanie Corral, and she would sleep in this bowl in the middle of a table. So Stanley's interaction around me had to do with, as he said, strange goings-ons, right? Strange goings-on around where I lived and the people who came and went. And of course, there were a lot of different people who came and went, simply because, of course, I was running a factory. We were politically involved, and I had begged people to come and look after the dogs, but nobody has come. So, is it too loud, Bonita?
Don't worry, don't worry.
Okay. Come on, guys. So they're back, not at all.
I feel like I'm back in your home, Jocelyn.
Yes. So, it's a horse cart passing. So there was, in fact, it has always been about an interaction with the animals, going into the bush, the houses themselves. And at one stage, when I think must have been in the early 80s or maybe 70s, he went to stay by another aunt, Betty Drayton, and he lived there for quite a few months when he was kind of in between getting a new apartment. This was when I think Barbara and the kids went up to the States, and he was alone. So, you know, my relationship to Kanye has always been about oddities as well. I loved cups, and so did he. So whenever I traveled around the world, I would look for a strange cup to carry for Stanley. When we went to Barbados in the days when he was there with Allison, he would have these cups. Mine were always broken or missing or something, but he would always have his cups. And he once did a painting called Cups. I think they were Allison cups, they were called, but it was about the way in which I would always, if he came to my house and he saw an interesting cup and he liked it, I would say, well, you take it. And this became kind of immortalized in a painting called Cups. For me, that was, and I used to have that painting. Unfortunately, of course, all the artwork I had was destroyed completely in the fire, uninsured, unfortunately, as well. But it was very much a part of what it is. So Stanley painted this painting behind me, the Phoenix, to say to me, don't give up. Get this bloody show back on the road. Don't give up the factory, where he spent time as well, where we were bending really aerial roots, lianas, and he would come up and engage with the guys up there. If I wanted something to do with color, I would ask him to come and do like a course. And he had done a color chart. He would say, you know, we were always appalled. Like, you know, there's a lot of interesting handwork in Guyana, but some of the color combinations leave a lot to be desired in my view. They're a lot better now, but at one time it would be like crazy colors. Not that kind of mix that you find in Africa or India that had a rhythm to it. They were just a little offbeat to me. So Stanley would do, and to him, fortunately, so he would do these kind of courses and how it is we could say, well, look, this doesn't work with this, or this works better with this. And we've always had these little interventions. We did a chair once, a macaw chair, which Alison had done, in which Mervyn Owen had designed the chair, and Stanley had kind of painted it up. It's, you know, lost in the many fires, and I don't have the photographs. But so much about my relationship to Stanley has been about his work and the work of people, I would say, of very ordinary people with great skills in Guyana, which is what has been so heartening for me. He would write and say, you know, have you heard this? Or, you know, I was very interested in how Joe has kept his emails. Well, my emails with Stanley would be something like, hey, Doe, I liked the thing you sent, which might have been the thing with the zebras, which I remember sending to him, but he may have gotten it from somewhere else. And then he would say, good, peace, gone. That would be the kind of, in essence, the extent of our exchanges, except since he has learned about WhatsApp, we do speak from time to time and have long conversations. So the technology has finally, enveloped him in a way, and he's not so resistant to dealing with modern means of communications. He was also extremely fond of my father, and when he died, he wrote a poem about him, because my father was very laid back, very non-judgmental kind of person who welcomed everybody into my house and what became his house as he got older. And Stanley and him would have these kind of breakfast conversations about Amsterdam, about whatever it was that they were talking about, the state of things or the bad state of things as they were going on in Guyana. But both were kind of very, not men of many words, but men who had both accomplished many things. And I think he was really very close to that. I was surprised how much he was, because the poem was lovely. It disappeared off my walls. To this day, neither he nor I know who took it, but it went. And he did a new one when at one point, and that of course has been burnt up. So, but the most interesting part of my relationship with Stanley around paintings was when he stayed at Palmer Street. He did give me a big painting, quite huge, called Black Ants and Diamonds, which was a painting that we discussed. So when I used to spend time in the bush, is the way in which ants would be bringing things to their nests that had nothing to do with food. They would be taking these little crystals or sparkling things that looked like diamonds. And he and I would say, yeah, you know, if you saw the ants, you want them, where the hell are they going with that? But apparently it was part of their termite nests, which were in the areas we were in below ground, not like in Europe, but only above ground. And this Black Ants and Diamonds was a fabulous film. Anyhow, they were showing this the Dominican Republic, and he and Mervyn, and they took out the painting and other paintings to the show, and came back to Barbados. I never brought it home. It was in Mervyn's house, and it disappeared. Mervyn couldn't tell where it had gone. I couldn't tell where it had gone. Stanley couldn't tell where it was gone. We remembered being there. I was really kind of like really hurt that I lost yet another piece of art. So he did a new piece for me. And it just had finishes where the house burnt, he had brought it. So we have decided that the Black Ants don't really want to be around me. So I've been trying to get him to say, man, Stanley, you know, you gotta give me back a Black Ants. He's done many other renditions of this that he sold to other people, but he resolutely says the Black Ants don't want to be around you. He'd also done a jaguar one, because I'm big into Chinese mythology, and he does the beautiful jaguar. And I hope at some point, Benita, we could do like a long listing of his work, that were, you know, to me, the cubism and everything was just fabulous at the time for Guyanese young artists to see. He spent a lot of time too at Carol Lodge, you know, because it in a sense was his old home for a long time. And he would go there and be under the mango tree and really enjoying it. And when he had, it was his 80th birthday, and Natasha came down and we had a kind of celebration with music, and I think he played the guitar himself, but there was a sax and so on. So it's always been about, like, if it was Christmas, he would bring out his guitar, would come with the steel band, as you said, and every now and then somebody with a sax would be there. Once Oliver Lake was around, you know, the famous saxophonist from the United States, and we would really have like a jam with Stanley being very much a part of, already part of my home and household. And, you know, there are many people, I mean, Rupert has been mentioned, Vanda, Dio Prasad, who drove him up and down, and both in London and here, was a close friend of his, Osase, who he taught at the art school at one time. And there are a number of people who, Stanley, Nisha Hanif, who had really close relationships with. And what I wanted to talk about really today was to say that Stanley was not just a teacher and the artist, he was really a person who amongst in my world, was a person who was part of really my family. And I think he used to say I was a sister he didn't have. And I think that's true. That he could always, I would say, I could rescue him from whatever situation he was in the old days, when he needed to find a place, which was not always a place to work, for advice, for advice about how to set up my showroom and the artwork, and really just to gap about what it is we had to try to save in Guyana and what it is we had to acknowledge will be lost forever. And I'm so glad that he's 88. So many of our friends are dead, and so many of them don't have the faculties intact as he has. And I think this is really a gift. But we've talked about why it is he is so capable. Well, he may have long-living genes and good memory genes, but I also think it is his complete dedication to his craft that has made him so able to not grow old in a very important sense. You know, he's growing wiser, he's lived longer, and he is more, I think, free of any of the boundaries about what it is he's making. He's makes all sorts of things that we see, you know, it could be the knife for the handle he's using in the kitchen. It could be a board to cut cheese on. It could be about a piece of ceramic, a vase. He did some beautiful early work around like turtles. And it's the thing about Stanley's work, I think, and about his dedication to his expertise, I would say, and not just his craft and his artistry, is that it is so thought out. You know, it starts with the drawing books. The journals have to be definitely kept and scanned. Stanley, as a person of fires, please make sure those things are scanned and digitized so that they're there forever. You know, well, you know, Guyana is a place of fires. What can I say to you? Anda's house burned down, Rashi's house burned down, my house burned down, my factory burned down. It's astonishing. But you're not living here, but still, I would like to think that you would take a hint and make sure that all of these things, or Fiona, are therefore preserved in a way that we could always have access to them. Is it my time up, Vanessa? I don't have a clock.
Sorry, I was enjoying everything you were saying so much I have paid no attention whatsoever.
Well, anyhow, I could let me just round up. It must be about 50 minutes, I guess. But I think Sandy used to come home at least once a year, if not once every 2 years, and it was always a joy. We did a number of things we tried to do. In the early 80s, I started up something really called Dorothy Tate Foundation, which was when we were in a house in Commonwealth Street, in order to do two things: to preserve the name of Dorothy Tate and to find a mechanism for gathering art that could become, in a sense, public art. So it was all around the building when it opened. And it's still, some of it is still there. But, if you don't have private money here, and there's not a lot of people who found anything here, you could start these things with the best of intentions. But if you don't have the capacity to keep on buying or keep on working out, or artists who would be willing to dedicate work to such a project, it becomes really a tall order. But at every step of the way, we always try to celebrate and to really to popularize, in a very ordinary sense, what was the best, I think, amongst the thing, the work that was being created, whether it was a painting, a piece of sculpture. It was from the students and boroughs. It was in the National Collection, judging with Alim and so on, where we all were part of, judges trying to secure things, that some of the best of things did not leave Guyana. And I think in that sense, when Stanley was on the Castellani board, he tried to make sure that there was enough of money out of the Ministry of Culture so that the better pieces can remain in the National Collection. And for me, I mean, if I think that there is something that, as Guyanese, and I say this to Joe and everybody else, that we should really make a part of the celebration of Stanley's life, is to get a building for the art that ain't wood. I wake up every day worried about wooden buildings in Guyana, and I get like sick at the thought of a fire at Castellani House. And the absolute need, and if there is a plea here, Stanley, that we could make on your behalf and on behalf of all the artists whose work is there, including, of course, the Land of the Dollarless Guard, is that we must, with all this money that is sloshing around here, difficult as life is for many, is that this should be a priority project. The project of securing the Guyanese National Collection in a place that is properly built for it, a place that is dedicated to the conservation of paintings in and around Guyana, and a place that becomes a place to train young conservators and to, in fact, be a place where young artists can have a reasonable expectation of being enabled. It is appalling to me that we have, it was always appalling to me that we would put a center of intelligence next to the art collection. And that is what we have. So if we have to find a new place, or we have to get rid of the Central Intelligence people or build something completely independent, which would be best, of course, maybe in that behind coffee and so on, is that is what we should be doing. And Stanley, I would really like, on your behalf, if we could make it on behalf of everybody who's listening here, if we could make this something as the beginning of an effort to do this, so that we can celebrate you and everybody else for generations to come, as you have been celebrated here today by generations past, and no doubt will be celebrated by generations to come through this medium. So thank you very much for having me, and happy birthday from all of us, including the dogs and the rest of the family. John and Christine were here to say hello to you, but I told them to get away. They were going to interrupt the show. So lots of love from us here. Abby is over the road at home. And just to remember that if one of the first people, Aubrey, who bought his paintings, and Stanley said, was Uncle Frank Williams, who bought it when I think was his first painting. And there is a piece that is really the heart of what he bought, which is a huge piece about a sprouting bean. Juanita, what I'd like to suggest is that with Ohini, that we make a collection of Stanley's works, which are enormous number, but and maybe something to do with his journals. So when you hit 90, we can really celebrate the Stanley. So keep on, keeping on. Lots of love from Guyana.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. That was fantastic. I just love the storytelling. I mean, as you can see, I got completely lost with time because I was enjoying everything you said, and I've even written down as a quote, "Guyana is a place of fires," because it's just automatically reminding me of Edgar Mittelhauser as well. And there's so many links between the way. I just think of the people that come out of Guyana. I always feel are so deeply tied to Guyana in so many different ways, but. I guess what you put across for me was this kind of Stanley's wonderment of life. I mean, every time I listen to Stanley, I feel an excitement of life and all the things around me. But somehow it's really tied to Guyana because of the way Guyana's this space of magical realism, where you were saying like about the cats bringing in leaves and just the magic of Guyana is there. And you can see how kind of Stanley and so many of the creators that come from Guyana are really influenced by the space itself. So thank you so much for that, and also for suggesting, obviously we have to secure a Guyanese national collection and find a space and a dedicated building for that. So really thank you so much, Jocelyn, and I'm sure everybody's joined me in clapping. Really appreciate your presentation and loved hearing the dogs in the background. Took me straight back to your home.
Right.
So thank you.
Take care.
And and by the way, you talked about cups as well. You might recognize this one.
Oh yeah, I did give you that one.
Yeah.
Is
we own.
Is we own. Oh, great.
Thank you.
And do you know it's about the skylight ibis that Joe was talking about that he saw in his yard? Because this is in Humberto where they're doing this Move the Shell Beach kind of presentation to Anna Arjun and them. And this is a cup, is we own.
Oh, right. Wonderful. So now I even know the backstory. I didn't know the backstory before. Thank you for that. So moving on, Corinna, if you can, for me, spotlight Therese Hatchety. Jocelyn, please stay on because we'll have questions at the end, and it would just be lovely to have everybody remain online. Therese, thank you so much. I believe you're joining us from Barbados.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's right. Okay, wonderful. Rod has sent me your bio, and so I understand from him that you grew up in Denmark and studied art history and modern culture at the University of Copenhagen. In 1990, you moved to Barbados, where you've worked as a freelance curator and visual arts commentator until you opened the Zemicon Gallery in 2000. After its closure a decade later, you enrolled in the Cultural Studies program at UE Cave Hill and wrote a PhD dissertation, which was to become the basis of your book, The Making of a Caribbean Avant-Garde. That's published, I think, by Purdue University Press, 2020. And you presently lecture at UE and the Barbados Community College. It's a real pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to share some slides.
Okay, I'll just give you co-hosting. There you go. You should be able to do it now.
Yes. Okay, well, so thank you very much. Hello, everyone. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this celebration. It's delightful to recognize the Stanley I know in all these presentations. I want to share, like the rest of you, a few memories. And then I want to try and tease out a few paradoxes about Stanley the artist and Stanley the man. And as a surrealist, of course, Stanley knows that the truth about things is always buried in contradictions, so I trust he doesn't mind. I don't recall exactly when I met Stanley, but it must have been around 1997. But what I do remember very clearly is paying a visit to his home with a pressing question on my mind. To what extent was his surrealism intended as a form of realism? Now, he could, of course, have dismissed my question as rooted in a certain kind of exotification of the Caribbean, but he didn't. Instead, he indulged me, and a long and valuable friendship was born. Though Stanley sometimes has bemoaned and been, I think, a little disappointed by the reserved and divided character of Barbadian society, the intellectual hospitality he extended to me and other searching souls, including many of his students, was magnanimous. And it not only helped me overcome my imposter syndrome, but it helped shape the Caribbean half of my life, including the decision to open the Semicon Gallery in 2000. Before that, I worked for another commercial gallery here in Barbados. And what struck me as extremely odd at that time was that the gallery I worked for did not show the works of a Stanley Greaves, nor by anyone else of his caliber. I did not yet understand the curious divisions of the Caribbean arts community, nor the fact, which is the first paradox, that you can be an artist of outstanding talent and singular importance in the Caribbean, and yet find yourself without representation. So Stanley graciously allowed me to show his work at the Semicon Gallery. And for 10 years, we had weekly summit meetings where we discussed whatever exhibition was currently on display, and then moved on to other important matters. For example, whether Guyanese pepper pot belongs to a higher tier of culinary civilization than Trinidadian callaloo. It was during these conversations that I discovered the incredibly wide span of Stanley's interests, and I have heard echoes of these in the other presentations. Among them, Sufi mysticism, calligraphy, British imperial history, quantum physics, Turkish military music, and anything related to ancient Egypt. I suppose it's stating the obvious to say that Stanley's friendship afforded me insights into the lived reality of the Caribbean that I never could have acquired on my own. When he spoke about Guyanese figures like Martin Carter, Dennis Williams, Rupert Burrows, Wilson Harris, and many others, it was as if all this cultural history also became part of my imagined history. It bears mention, though, that Stanley's expatriate memory seemed to have a special feature which somehow erased people's humans' failings. And one of the paradoxes of Stanley the man is his tendency to hold himself to a much higher standard of moral accountability than he holds anyone else. After the opening of Semicon, one of the first projects I undertook was the organization of a traveling show of the There's a Meeting Here Tonight series. And you will recognize the annunciation here as a part of that series. So the series was shown in Trinidad, Guyana, England, and later Martinique. And here's another paradox. The exposure of the meeting series was in some sense achieved at the expense of Stanley's other works, and I think partly responsible for the misconception that Stanley primarily is a political artist. But as he himself has pointed out, the meeting series is actually an anomaly in the oeuvre, for Stanley's interest in politics is generally overshadowed by his interest in metaphysics. Meanwhile, the continued spotlight on the meeting series revealed something I had mentally displaced, but due to my own cultural hybridization, namely how culturally coded these paintings are. Caribbean people get them, whereas most non-Caribbean people need a translation. And since Stanley has been deeply invested in the development or evocation of a distinctive Caribbean metaphysic, I can only imagine that he must be very pleased that his work has managed to awaken a sense of community in Caribbean viewers, if also a sense of curiosity in many others. In fact, One of my fondest memories of the semicon era is that of a middle-aged Englishman who came in one day while Stanley was visiting. And with a sense of urgency in his voice, he asked if I knew where he might be able to find any works by the famous artist Stanley Greaves. You can imagine my satisfaction in being able to say, yes, I do. Would you like to meet him? But of course, there's also a very particular group of viewers that might not want to get Stanley's work at all. At one of the exhibition openings for the meeting series, I fell into conversation with someone conversation with someone with close ties to a certain Caribbean government, and I hasten to say it's not the Guyanese government. I asked how she thought her political friends would feel about these paintings. After all, they didn't exactly offer a flattering representation of the political class. Without hesitation, she said that their reaction would simply amount to, "Good dear, is that how you feel?" I was so stung by this response that I couldn't bring myself to tell Stanley about it. You see, I was naive enough to think that he was a bit naive about the reach and impact of his work. I didn't realize then that these so-called political paintings were not aimed at this class at all. When Stanley has sought to engage the political establishment, it has primarily been on matters of art education and cultural policy. And here's one more paradox, or perhaps rather a curiosity. Stanley, as you all know, is a fervent proponent of art education, and yet hesitates to describe himself as an artist. As we all know, and which has been a part of the title of this event, he describes himself as a maker of things. And to be sure, this reflects his disdain for any kind of art speak. But truthfully, I've never been quite sure what to make of this self-designation, or how to square that with his emphasis on the primacy of vision, which, by the way, was discussed in a recent online forum. And in my head, the image of Stanley as a maker of things is that of an industrious god busily imagining what else should be put in this world. But I think there's something more going on here, because in moments of frustration and mock dictatorial bluster, Stanley would typically say that, given the opportunity, he would just make it so. Making things and making it so is obviously invested in a notion of willpower and agency. And this is where I feel that yet another paradox sneaks in, for the forcefulness with which Stanley expresses this desire to see things put right through one swift action betrays the general sense that things are not going in the right direction, that they are in fact slipping out of control. And this contradiction between an acute awareness of things going awry and a sense of paralysis in terms of fixing them is also reflected in Stanley's oeuvre. In so many works, we encounter human beings who seem both inscrutable and clairvoyant, but whose ability to make it so seems extremely limited. It can indeed seem as if the agency of Greaves' Caribbean people consists mainly of using obia or pulling strings, whereas the real power appears to rest with a constellation of invisible actors, animated things, spirits, and cosmic forces. So I think that the paradoxes of our beloved friend include those of being profoundly invested in reason and logic, and in spirituality and esoteric knowledge, in a commitment to the primacy of the eye and the making of material things, in universal values and the specificity of Caribbean culture, and indeed in paradox itself. And I would like to end by saying that my comments are, of course, offered not as a conclusion at all, but merely as the beginning of what I hope to be a long conversation about Stanley the man and Stanley the artist. Happy birthday.
Wonderful, thank you, Therese. That was really interesting. And I guess what it's I've left thinking that actually Stanley has some kind of a disdain for labels. You know, you're talking, I think Aubrey had spoken earlier about him wanting women artists or Black artists or whatever type of artist to just be called artists. And then you also, he doesn't even like the term art education, you know, and it's this kind of thing. It's almost like, I guess, Stanley feeling that spirit transcends labels. I don't know, spirit's such a central part of his work that it's maybe spirit transcends all of these kind of markers or indicators or things that kind of box people. But maybe he'll probably speak a bit more to that later. But yeah, everybody please, let's thank Therese very much for that presentation, and really wonderful to have you kind of representing the Bayesian side of Stanley's life as well, and just talking a bit more, and just having somebody speak from Barbados is wonderful. So trying to think who's next. Carinya, can you spotlight Ahini for us, if Ahini's still online? Let's invite Ahini Kawama to join us now. Ahini, we didn't get a chance to get a bio from you. So, but of course, I'll introduce you as the curator at Castellani House. And I believe you also lecture as well in education and humanities at UG, is that right?
No, I did help a few students, but that wasn't formal, it was more informal.
Okay. Well, if you could just maybe share a little bit about your background and then offer us the presentation that you've got for Stanley. But we're really grateful that you're joining us from Guyana, and it's fantastic to see you.
Yes, well, greetings everyone. This covers those who are in the night and those who are in the day. I am a little under the weather. That's why I was off on mute and off the video, because I have this little itchy throat. Something's going wrong in Guyana. Well, I taught visual arts when I graduated from the Borough School of Art. After 1 year freelancing, I taught it for 8 years at 2 different secondary schools. So I got a diploma from Borough School of Art in 1994. And I was a student of Dr. Dennis Williams in art history from 1993 to 1992 to 1994. So I was lucky to have some knowledge imparted from Dr. Dennis Williams, which helped me to this day in what I do, in teaching and also in curating the National Gallery of Art. I joined the National Gallery of Art in 2003. After I had done some courses in conservation and restoration, and I also did a course in collection management for museums. I later went on to the University of Guyana not too long ago and got a bachelor's degree in visual arts. So that's a little about what I did. I've done a lot of different things too, small in substance maybe. But however, I currently am also the curator for the National Arts from Guyana going to Carifesta. I started in 2015. We had a pause for the COVID-19 pandemic. We were to go to Antigua in 2020 or 2021. To date, we're not sure if that event will resuscitate or when it will, but we seems to be living with COVID, finding ways to survive in it, and we are ready to go where we may need to go to continue showcasing our visual arts, giving our artists exposure. Sorry, I think my cell phone just came off the stand. Yes. To take our art from Guyana and our artists wherever we are inclined to go or asked to go, to continue on the visual arts program at Carifesta, a program I think that is still molded and shaped by CARICOM. But we do look forward to continue exposing arts in the Caribbean and continue that dialogue and meeting artists. It's amazing the amount of artists you meet from different parts of the Caribbean and Some will tell you of the artist they know from your end, or ask you about a particular artist, and so on. And even from the non-English speaking Caribbean. It's amazing. It's a great initiative by CARICOM and the Caribbean countries, despite some of the unsettled discussions and arguments from various persons for various reasons. We cannot doubt them or dismiss them. We can only continue and get it better and move forward. So that's about that. And so if you are hearing me clear, let me continue on the program about my friendship, my contact with Stanley Greaves. I am quite honored, and today I must say happy birthday, Stanley Greaves, and thank you very much for all those who were here sharing it. I'm not sure if I'm the youngest, but the current state of things in Guyana, I feel like I'm about to celebrate my 88th birthday too. So sorry if I'm feeling that way, but I can say that meeting Stanley Greaves in 1992 or 1993 at the Borough School Park while I was a student, quite a skinny guy, was amazing. The way I'm feeling right now, slight a bit nervousness. It's exactly the way I felt when I first saw him. We were at the Borough School of Art. We were unfortunate, we had no National Gallery of Art, but we had films and our programs available to us at the different libraries. Along with some other students, we take the lead and organized films at the then John F. Kennedy Library that we had just around the corner on Main Street. We would take the entire batch of students to watch those films, but they were all on American artists. However, they were very good films showing what these artists would have done and achieved. What was sad is that we had no films on our own artists like Stanley Greaves and Philip Moore and Dudley Charles and Bobby Williams and all of this. We, however, had a film later down in the couple of years on Aubrey Williams, I think it's called Mark of the Hand, that was shown at the National Gallery of Art eventually when it came to being in 1992-3. So my first encounter with Stanley Greaves, I was in my teens. I was doing a research paper on sculpture in Guyana, and it was the School of Sculptors by what's his name, Gary Thomas, who I was quite interested in. Gary Thomas' approach to sculpture for me was quite exciting. The way he spontaneously carved wood and created his holes, the finish of it, and so on. Dr. Dennis Williams, who was tutoring me in art history, was quite interested in my approach to that study. So he guided me, and I was able to speak with many persons who were doing sculpture before Gary Thomas, during the time of Gary Thomas, and collections that were existing there, like the Keystones collection, who had large amounts of works done by Gary Thomas and Umwai Lumumba, who was his contemporary. But what was amazing, my meeting with Stanley Greaves in 1992-93, when I started to do my paper on the sculpture of Gary Thomas, was the best thing to me ever happened. We had no cell phones then. We were struggling with ways to record, so you were forced to write fast as you can, collecting notes from persons as they speak with you, you ask questions. But luckily, we had these little tape recorders then using cassettes, and you had to put your cassette in, and you had to be very coordinated to press two buttons. One, I think, called record. If you might probably remember those. One called record, and one is for play, I think. Mm-hmm. But I think at that time when I was speaking with Mr. Greaves, I asked him if I can record what he was saying, and he agreed, and I was amazed. So that's the first thing I've learned of Mr. Greaves then, that he was quite down to earth, and he would work and speak with anyone who was interested in the arts and what they were doing. He had no qualms with that, none at all. So we went into this little sculpture room that we had at the Burroughs Boulevard, then in Carmichael Street next to the president's house right now. I think now it's National Trust, but it was Burroughs Boulevard. So we had this little studio, sculpture studio, where we store our materials, we would do our clay modeling and so on. Stanley Greaves came in there with me. I sat on a stool, he sat on a chair. I had a little area on the shelving where I placed the recorder, and I clicked the 2 buttons. Until today, I think I clicked 3 buttons, but however, it recorded what he said. And when he left, I never turned off the recorder. So we walked to the door and he left, and we spoke a bit, and I was so nervous. I was so nervous, and at the same time so overjoyed with what he did for me then. That it was amazing. I think he had came to the school to do a presentation too, and we all enjoyed it and asked questions and so on. But he left, and I went back to my recording and realized that it was still running. So I had to reverse everything to the beginning to get what it was a brand new cassette, to get what I recorded, and I was overjoyed. So I sat day after day listening to what I recorded from him, extract my notes and compile my dissertation based on Gary Thomas and sculpture in Guyana. What he told me was amazing in comparison to what Dr. Dennis Williams also told me. So I was one lucky youngster, I would say then, to have information from him and also information from Dr. Dennis Williams that helped me with my compiling my paper for the.
Can't hear you. Ohini, I think you've accidentally you've muted yourself.
I left the Burroughs by 1994, sorry. By then we had the National Gallery of Art that was founded in 1992. We had a change of government, and the building that was known as the residence for then President Forbes Barnum was given to the arts and became the National Gallery of Arts. It was named by Dr. Dennis Williams. The name was suggested by him to be Castellani House. Dr. Williams was still alive and going well. I think he died in 1995. So when I left in 1994, there were a few times I would be back at the Walter Road Museum where Dr. Williams was to discuss a few things with him. And he obliged me to meet and discussions and so on. One of the things I want to say too, I forgot, that while we were at Burroughs School of Art and I was a student, seeing the works by artists from Guyana, especially the works by Stanley Greaves and other artists, it was quite difficult. You had to go to the Walter Road Museum and Dr. Williams had to give you permission. They were well taken care of and cared about and stored. So you had to go carefully to go through those works that were stored and you see works. It was amazing when we saw the works done by artists, Rupert Williams, Stanley Greaves, and W. Charles, and so on. I was amazed by the works by Stanley Greaves because they were so well preserved and well presented, the framing, everything about it. Later on in years, when I was teaching at Charlestown Secondary, when the gallery was full in swing, then the rooms were still like a house. I would go across there to see his work on display. And it was always amazing and fresh, like if it was just painted. And years would go by, and then there were works started on the National Gallery. First, we had Mr. Evelyn Austin, the first curator, for a year or two. And then we had Mr. Alfredo Bissamba, who was also curator for quite a number of years. Under her, the gallery is transformed internally and a bit externally, but mostly internally for larger display space. So when the construction started, the gallery was not in operation for quite some time. But as soon as it was reopened, and they had a reopening exhibition. We were there as youngsters, myself and some other colleagues. I was amazed to see Stanley Greaves' work on the walls and just remember right away what they were back then when I was a student, still looking the same way fresh until today. The works in the National Collection by all artists, the best works, I wouldn't say best kept, all of them are being attended to, but the works that is well presented and preserved are the works by Stanley Greaves. He had a craftsmanship and a way of constructing his frames, surfaces, and everything for presentation and for exhibitions that I recently used as an example with the women artists group, the Guyana Women Artists Group. They had a presentation of skills sharing. So they asked me to do a presentation. I did it on presentation of your work for exhibitions at the National Gallery, because there are concerns that we want to have a standard and we want everyone to at least try their best to have the works presented properly, because we've recognized that some artists deliberately have a negligence for presenting their work properly. So I used the examples of Stanley Greaves' work in that presentation. And what was amazing, the reaction from persons who were in the presentation, they loved the way that he presented his works in the form of a scroll. So I told them the little trick in that too. Once it's presented like that, you have a chance to travel with your works rolled in quantities and easier to handle. You can actually carry an entire exhibition under your shoulder, under your arms to wherever you're going, and cost less too. Because we know the cost for shipping and taking works around the world for exhibition. So they were impressed by this, but I said it's not easy. We have some works in the collection that you need to examine that Stanley Greaves did in terms of presenting them in the form of a scroll. So it will give you an idea some of the challenges he faced. You need to look at it in details. They agree. But let me go back a little bit. When I was asked to come to the National Collection to assist them curator Ms. December in doing some research and compiling the works, I was tasked with compiling the works for of sculpture for the inventory. It was a challenge, and I did what I had to do. I got through my task, and then I was eventually approached to ask to be at the gallery. It was a part-time job, and then I was asked to be at the gallery full-time. So I took up that opportunity in 2003 in August, and I'm still there today. The challenges are very much there to maintain and keep a national collection. And I recall some of the concerns raised right here by my aunt Justin Dow about fires and so on. Yes, it's a threat. Stanley Greaves never spared a moment speaking about that while he was on the board and while I was there. So we have presently 2 external buildings in the gallery compound that is concrete and lined with clay bricks, where we house 75% right now of the national collection for safety. And one of the things I recall doing when I actually was asked to be the curator acting in 2014 was to review the wiring of the building. So there was an electrician who I had access to. We submit our proposals to the permanent secretary, got the rewards for doing those wiring projects, and I should say they were successful. We discovered some wiring where there was a thread joining, and we did straight runs right through, so everything was cleaned and changed, and eventually the flow of electricity was safer. We also have a security system to detect when a fire would start. Unfortunately, we don't have a sprinkler system. We have fire extinguishers in place where they should be. The other thing too, we did a project in 2016. We changed all lights, the fluorescent lights, and we're using now LED lights. That reduced the load of electricity by half. So you currently have less strain by electricity on any of the breakers or anything in the gallery that might possibly be a threat for fire. So I should say, feeling comfortable at this point, but you cannot take anything for granted. There is a need for a new gallery and one that is fireproof, as Brother Joe Singh mentioned, because it would be ideal, it will be better. But at the moment, the risk of fire by electricity or any other agent except by arson, we are comfortably safe with that. We are comfortably safe with that.
Ohini, sorry to interrupt you. I'm just conscious it's getting to 5:30. So I just wondered if you could say your final words before we move to Stanley.
Okay, of course.
Thank you.
So as it is, we are safe to date in terms of most of the threats of fire, and we are continuously monitoring the national collection, which is a concern for Stanley Greaves, I know very much. I forgot one thing I wanted to mention. While I was at the gallery there, I recognized the works by Stanley Greaves that stopped at the 1950s. So it bothered me, because as a student or students coming to the gallery, you couldn't follow the works of Stanley Greaves in the early 50s or when he started to what he was doing currently in terms of the political series and the shadow series and all of those works. It was with the help of the committee in 2015, 2016, we were able to repair that gap. So we were barely able to salvage a few of his mini works, small works, and were able to salvage some of his shadow works. And then recently he had an exhibition at the gallery on works done by, his reference was on Wilson Harris. And we were able to capture quite a few of those pieces. So we are also comfortable right now that if you were a student or researcher or art historian, you'll be able to see representations of Stanley Greaves' work from his very early days to what he has done very recently. So that's my comfort, and I'm happy with what we've achieved so far. And this brings me to the end of what I want to contribute on the day of Stanley Greaves' birthday, but I very much look forward to his 90th birthday, because I was quite pleased with the presentation of Joe Singh with his PowerPoint and others. That's something I should have done, because during Stanley Greaves' presentation at Stanley at Castellani House, many times, I was the one who would put together his
Ohini, I'm so sorry. I'm going to cut you there because
yes, thank you very much.
We've literally got something that's about to happen, so I need to switch them. But I just want to say thank you so much. It was really, really useful hearing from the perspective of somebody from the younger generation. Also wonderful to have you because you're based in Guyana and doing the hard work of curating art in Guyana. So really great to hear all the kind of, how you're responding to the challenges, not just with the threats of fire and everything else going on, but also good to hear that the Stanley's work is more readily movable, in terms of exhibitions, and also to hear about the level of craftsmanship involved in his work. So yeah, just thank you so much. But I just want to quickly, while I'm clapping and saying thank you, please stay online. I'm going to move quickly to Stanley. Stanley, are you there? Corinna, if you can just pin Stanley or spotlight him. I just want to move to Stanley because Stanley, do you want to talk to me about what's going on behind you? And maybe we could just all start singing. I don't know.
Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
No, what's behind me is total. Watch it.
Look what's going on, yeah.
That's my daughter and Alexander, my workshop apprentice assistant.
Wonderful. So I don't know if Sonia, who's in the background, Sonia, are you going to be singing Happy Birthday? Can we?
No, it's Alexander who's a singer. Alexander.
Okay.
Fantastic singer.
So on 1, 2, 3, go for it. 1, a 2, a 3.
Happy
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday
to you.
Happy
Birthday,
birthday.
dear Stanley. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Woo! We all wished we were there to share in with the cake.
That was a very good birthday present to hear Alexander. Alexander has a fantastic voice, and I'm predicting great things for him because he's studying to be a drama student. He's also an accomplished pianist and also has been doing voice training. And he has quite a remarkable voice, yes. Okay, I think before anything else, I would like to give my appreciation to the fabulous Westmust duo for making this presentation possible. I'm also deeply respectful of my contributions, my contributors, and I appreciate their enduring friendship, which has been a solid friendship over the years. And I'm blessed indeed to know my friends. I know that they've presented a kind of composite portrait, and I'm hearing things about myself that I hope I do not have to live up to. People will tell you things and they put you in big trouble because afterwards you have to remember the things that you say, that they said, and then say, oh, I'm supposed to be saying this or doing this. At this time, I would wish that I could have been Captain Picard, my favorite character on Star Trek, where I could then summon up refreshments for everybody. And so I would like to say thanks to you all, and also may light and love attend you continuously. And there's one little anecdote I'd like to conclude with. In Guyana, I used to have exhibitions at the United States Information Services Gallery. And I used to take my girls with me, Sanya, who was just there, Fiona, and Natasha, to exhibitions. Andre, by that time, was living in the US. So one day they said to me, Dad, when are we going to another show? I said, oh, it means they're interested in art. Well, it wasn't the art they were interested in the food. So I thought that was so great. They were very outspoken as to what they were interested in. No, it's not the painting, it's the food. So that's that. I'd like to respond very quickly to some of my contributors. To Joe, I regard Joe as a Guyanist. As far as I'm concerned, a Guyanist is the highest category. Guyanese will follow after that. But I regard Joe as a Guyanist. One, because of his contribution to Guyana at all kind of levels, which, it's very astonished over a period of time to discover the amount of committees, international and local, that he's been involved with, which are connected with the well-being and the conduction of the biology and botany of Guyana, agriculture and things like that. So I regard Joe definitely as a Guyanist. I have a good laugh over seeing the presentation of the food that I've been preparing, because when my daughters hear what I'm cooking, they roll their eyes. But I tell them that I'm still alive, so it's working. The thing about I also respect about Joe is, I think, our mutual feelings for the spirituality of the land and the way in which that needs to be preserved. And of course, the people who are directly connected with that spirituality will be the indigenous peoples. And this aspect of Joe is reflected in the fact that he has been welcomed as a member of the YY community. And that for me speaks volumes. And there's Aubrey Williams, who spoke about his adventures at Saints with me with the drawing lesson, but he forgot to mention that Aubrey can paint. He is a painter. Unlike me, I paint by numbers, but Aubrey he understands paint. And for the life of me, he spent so much time straying about the US and socializing, he's not painting enough. So every time I speak with him, he's reminded about continuing to paint because he has things to say through his paintings. Of course, the thing about the boot polish and camping was the fact that the boys did not realize that both the toothpaste and the boot polish are highly scented. So I can scent when they're coming, trying to paint it. Of course, I never let them onto that secret. That was my secret weapon. Aubrey has been very, very close to me. The friendship like that of Bobby Finance never ceased between the time when we first met in schools. In the case of Bobby Finance, it was from primary school days, Main Street School, until the day of his death. And Bobby always regarded me, which I appreciate, as being a member of his family. I was regarded as that, as being a member of his family. And he said it with great conviction. And I appreciate that very, very, very much. Yes, Bobby, for me, is in that category as well of Guyanist. And his way of expressing it was through his fantastic collection, the photography he did all throughout the length and breadth of Guyana. And I was the one who encouraged him to show these photographs. And it really did make a difference to those who have seen those photographs. What else is there? Aubrey asked, because when we said that when I was in Guyana, part of my soul was in England, straying about. And then when I was in England, part of my soul is left in Guyana. And then when I came back, I was lost. I was really lost. And it's like being in the center of the Sargasso Sea. And then I went on call it expedition with Bobby, really in the heartland of Guyana, in the Mazruni area. And I had certain experiences there where time seemed to have done a very strange thing. I had dreams, first of all, of art and music and so on. And then I would be speaking with Bob and said, "You remember that tree we saw a day ago?" He said, "That was 2 days ago." And it had me very confused. But when we returned back to Georgetown, I continued painting. There was one painting I did called Mazruni. And with that painting, it seemed to have brought my soul back again together. I was a unified person. And after that, the word just flowed. And then we come on to Dawn. Dawn, I respect Dawn very much for her musical abilities and for her artistic abilities. I'm amazed, as Shakespeare would say, by her work in textiles. Her quilting are incredible quilts. I've been trying to get one from Dawn for ages. Her incredible quilts, and also the new works that she has been doing along those lines in textiles, which have a very strong, convincing pictorial element. She's also has been also a collector of Guyanese folk songs, and I hope sometime or the other, as an accomplished pianist and so on, she'll be able to have those folk songs put on a record, a CD or something, which would be available to everyone. I have also collected those songs from my soul brother was at Makanju, 22nd of November and the 23rd. We used to meet to celebrate our birthdays, and on the 22nd, we start on the night of the 22nd and go over into the 23rd. And between a few friends and ours, it became so popular that eventually we started to have practice birthday parties. And people say, "Practice? What are you talking about? Practice birthday party?" I said, "Listen, when you're a member of a team, you have to have practice session before you do the real event." You know, so that was a relationship with Wordsworth, my soul brother. We spent a lot of time talking, exchanging ideas. He was a fine poet as well. That's Wordsworth. Yeah. Well, this business about the eyes, I'm not aware of it, but I know when I was at St. Stanislaus, one of my colleagues, he said to me, he asked his nephew, "How are you getting on with that fellow Graves?" And his nephew said, "Oh, that man, he only sits and he looks at you." That was, and I was aware of that. And then at UG, Joel Benjamin, a very fine painter himself, very few paintings by him, but also an extremely good cartoonist. And he did a cartoon of me. And when I saw the cartoon, I wondered why it was that he had emphasized the eyes so much. But there's this thing about the eyes. But as far as I'm concerned, the eyes are the window of the soul. And I know that I used to do a thing in classes at Saints. Whenever I came to a new class, I would sit them down and I would sit, and then I would look each student in the eye for a couple of seconds, dead silence, because they're all wondering, well, why he looking at me like that? As I told Aubrey when he said, "Ma, you know, we were hard on us," and so I said, "What are you talking about hard on you? You're forgetting that this was one pair of eyes looking at you, and you were 25, 26 pairs of eyes looking at me, each one of you coming to some kind of assessment. And then when you get together, you create the personage of me, out of which usually would come a false name. Fortunately, fortunately, the only false name for which I'm eternally grateful was Gravo. But other names that other tutors had, you know, you don't want to say. And at Mainstreet School, I was called Gravesy. So I was able to avoid having the kind of false name you don't want to be associated with. Thank you, Aubrey. And Justin, yeah, Justin is another Guyanist of the highest order. The one thing that struck me about Justin was her empathy for others. And that empathy included not only friends, but it also includes sometimes total strangers. I have seen Jocelyn personally offer help, financial and otherwise, to total strangers that she came into contact with first time. And she would always be asking, what are you doing, how are you? And from that, she was able to do things to help them. And that is something which has been extended throughout her life so far, and I hope it continues. And I think Jocelyn still has contributions to make to Guyana. I know that one of the things, before that, this empathy thing, I remembered the way in which when both Bill Carr and Martin Carter had problems. And she was asking me about them, and I just happened to say, "Oh, well, this is happening to Bill, or this is happening to Martin." And Justin immediately acted. And on one occasion, when I mentioned that Martin was not feeling too well, she actually went to Martin. And on that very visit, she's able to acquire an aircraft, rent an aircraft to fly him to Barbados for medical treatment from what she observed on seeing him. And it seemed that what she did was the correct thing, because if she waited any longer, I think that would have been the end of Martin Carter. When Bill Carr was on leave and couldn't get to return to the UK, and I happened to spoke, she would say, "What's happened to Bill?" I said, "Oh, Bill is on leave. You know, he'd like to go to the UK, but he doesn't have the money," kind of thing. And Jocelyn turned up on campus, and she made arrangements to the University of Guyana, and she was able to allow a Bill to go to visit the UK, and that was the last visit he ever paid. So I respect her deeply for that the emphatic nature, if that's the correct word, her empathy for others, and her willingness to serve, Thank you, Jocelyn. It's been something else. As you said, it's been something else knowing you, having to deal with you, the people that you know, and also your pets. The pets, that's another dimension. And I always said, I used to say to Jocelyn, I wish that I didn't have anything else to do and to follow you around with a notebook and a tape recorder, because I personally feel that Jocelyn Dow's biography would have to be definitely in 2 volumes for the number of things that she has done so far, and still to do, and still to accomplish.
Stanley, if I may say, what I really liked about Jocelyn, what Jocelyn said, and now I'm forever going to be thinking of the two of you, not as you know, like you have these people like what is it, Walker the British and Law and Order. I'm going to be thinking of you as Order and Disorder.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. I'm going to that. That order and disorder thing. When I saw Jocelyn's spectacles, that's exactly it. Because it is the order, the orderliness of the circle, and then the square has a different kind of orientation. It's a wonderful pair of spectacle glasses she has. One side is square and one side is a circle. But it also is a perfect example for me of my enduring belief in duality, in that the universe is built on duality. And many years ago, I had the idea, why is it whenever I think of something, there is always the opposite? And I used to go around trying to find a word to encapsulate both of them, not possible. But duality, the way in which things exist, and the opposite exists. And we have to try and reconcile both. And while I'm on that note, that book that I mentioned to Joe about Idris Saw's book, The Sufis, is a book I recommend to everybody. It's going to blow your mind. I still delve into that book from time to time. It's a real eye opener. Yes. Justin did that Liana, the story of that Liana factory business. It began in my home in Barbados. Justin came for a visit, and she said, "What do you know about? What do you think about our canes? Those cane shares that we made?" And I said, "Well, they are not very serviceable. One, because they're put together with nails, and two, because it's not a wood, it is a vine. It comes apart very easy." So she said, "Lend me your phone." Now, when I hear that, I know magic is about to happen. Lend me your phone. Jocelyn phoned somebody in the UK, and the person's wife answered. And Jocelyn wants to know, wanted to speak to this man, her husband. And she was able to give Jocelyn his number because he was in New York. And I said, "But this is crazy. A strange woman, strange voice, phoning from overseas about your husband, and you're going to give that information?" Anyway, that's Jocelyn. The man, the first statement from the man was, "How did you get this number?" But then she proceeded to outline what it is she would like to do, pay his passage to Guyana, and to make a proposition about setting up this factory. She was able to do that and was able to get her factory going. Fantastic. She brought men from Singapore, all the way from Singapore, to teach the people in Guyana how to bend the canes, because, you know, they deal with lianas. It was a fantastic, mind-blowing operation. But that's just thing. An enchantress, a magician in her own, or some people say, "Well, be a woman," in her own right. Therese Hatchety, it was great having Therese as a friend and colleague in Barbados. And my first meeting with Therese is when she came to interview me for some newspaper, something or the other. The first thing that struck me was the way in which she paid attention to what I was saying. People sometimes don't really listen to you that much, but I was shocked by that. And then later got to know her. And she was working at a gallery, which was kind of like Border Market. And she would like to do something better about it, open up a gallery. She said it would be difficult. I said, make a start, make the first step. She did. And months passed by. She said, "Well, you know, nothing is happening, nothing is happening." I said, "Well, you know, you've made the first step." And then one day she phoned. I said, "I know exactly why you're phoning." She said, "Would you believe this? I have just had 3 offers of locations where I could have my gallery, and the rest is history." So I told her, I said, "You know, whenever you open your gallery, I want to be the first artist on your roster, not necessarily the first person to exhibit, but I want to be the first person on your stable," as they call it, and which happened. On Saturdays, I spent so many Saturdays in Therese's gallery, and we would sit and we'd cover all kinds of topics on art, philosophy, all kinds of things. And those form a very important part of my sojourn in Barbados. And I miss those talks very much, because we really went around the universe in those talks. Ohini, it was good listening to you because I had some insights into the history of the National Collection. And I was very pleased that you mentioned the name of two sculptors, Gary Thomas and Omowale Lumumba, two of our finest sculptors. One of them died and the other one emigrated to New York. And then he told me he was doing that. I said, you're going to run into trouble because, first of all, those very large tree trunks that he used to collect to carve, you're not going to be able to get those in New York. So I'm not in touch with him, so I do not know how he's making out as a sculptor in New York. It is going to be extremely, extremely difficult. But it was good to hear those two names called because they, unlike myself, they were full-time sculptors. They were sculpted every day and produce extraordinary work which would find a place in any international gallery. I'm confident about that. Dennis Williams is another story. Dennis Williams became director of art through something I told him. Dennis Williams was in Georgetown once visiting and said he came down to the people in the National History and Arts Council, wanted to speak with him, but so far nothing really of interest has developed. So I knew what was going on. I said to him, I said, Dennis, if you really wanted to talk to somebody about art or whatever, the person to talk to is Forbes Burnham. And you can go and speak to him tomorrow, Saturday morning. When I saw Dennis, it was a Friday afternoon, and he was about to return back to the bush. I said, Saturday, Burnham is in the public buildings, and you can go there. He knows you, and you can speak with him. Next thing is, Dennis Williams is the director of art. He wanted me to go and work with him, but I don't think I was a welcome person at the National History and Arts Council. I said, no, I'll help you, but I'll remain at Queen's College. But the overriding thing was, if I had joined the National History and Arts Council, then I wouldn't have my holidays to paint and go straying about in the bush. And that was very, very important. Yes. So thank you very much for that information, and also for reviewing what you have been doing as regards the security of the National Collection. And I will certainly take up the suggestion by Jocelyn to do that. We need to do something, make a very strong presentation to the government about a proper home for our National Collection. And it is something that I will certainly start working on. In the past, I have written open letters to the press and what have you, but of course nothing happened. But I think now perhaps is the time to make a strong interjection. And in this point in time, I think I will have to get with me a core of people along with myself in order to create a mass. You have to have a critical mass to get things done. When I returned to Guyana to try to get things done in art, I soon realized that those things were not going to happen because I did not have a critical mass behind me to create the movement, to create that kind of energy, which in turn would create results. So that's about what Ohini talked about birthday, 90th birthday. Ohini was the one who orchestrated my 80th birthday. What a birthday party. I have an exhibition of work, and Ohini quietly decided to organize this thing as a birthday party as well. What a birthday party. I was able to get a very close friend of mine, Ina Harvey from Barbados, who is also a very fine singer. And she was a member of a group I used to play with, Wataka. We used to do parang and calypsos and folk songs. And so she came across, and so we had a surprise event where Ina sang and I accompanied her. And I'm sorry, because I'm not into photographs, I did not have a photograph of some of the things in that event, but I'm told that some of them have appeared on YouTube, which is good. So they're circulating out there somewhere. The magic of Guyana, it is there. Dennis Williams was aware of it. And of course, so was both Wilson Harris and Mittelholzer. And this is why I did two series of paintings. One of them called The Shadows Move Among Us, which is based on the title of Mittelholzer's book, not on the theme of the book. But this idea of the existence of shadows was fascinating. And I did a series, quite a long series of paintings of shadows. And I entitled it Shadows Move Among Them. And of course, I also did a series of paintings based on my reading Wilson Harris. You cannot illustrate Wilson Harris. And it was a very difficult thing to do. It took me 30 years before I was able to accomplish it. 30 years thinking about it. It never left my mind. I tried in the 60s, I did 3 paintings which were no good. But then later on, I said, I have to do this thing. When I spoke to Wilson Harris, he said, I wish you good luck. I knew why he said that. I said, Wilson, I need to do this thing, win, lose, or draw. The first like 4 or 5 paintings of it, they had lost. But later on, I was able to achieve at least about 6 paintings that I think captured the spirit of what I wanted. Because what I wanted to do was to compare my straying about in the bush with Wilson Harris's experiences as a surveyor, which also was the background to any number of his books. And that's why I wanted to do that exhibition. And he was, in his response to the exhibition was that he was very pleased about the exhibition and about some of the works that he saw. And that for me also gave me a very, very great deal of satisfaction that I was able to accomplish, if not totally, at least part of what I had in my mind. Yeah, that's about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stanley. We're coming up to 6, so I had hoped to kind of involve the audience, because I know, we've got Ray Krill, Keith Waite is online, Fitzgerald Ure wanted to say something, Jonathan Locke is also online, and a lot of people have put comments in the meeting chat, so I'm going to save that and send that to you so you can see what people have said. But before we go, I just wanted to invite Fiona. Fiona, if you're there.
Oh, yes, I'm here.
Good. I'm going to hand straight over to you because I'm just conscious of time. So rather than anybody who's got happy birthdays or comments or memories that they want to share with Stanley, please put your comments in the chat. I'll send them to him. And then meantime, we're going to close off with Fiona's comments.
Oh, all right. Thank you so much. My siblings invited me to speak on behalf of the 3 of them.
That's a conspiracy.
It is a serial conspiracy. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. One of whom is hiding behind the kitchen door, but
Yeah,
she shall remain nameless. Yes. First, we wanted to express our deepest and most sincere thanks to Juanita and Rod for the amazing friendship that they have with Dad, and also for hosting this event with us. We had started thinking about it maybe after Dad's birthday last year, and we thought, well, maybe we'll do it for 88, because 88 is a beautiful number, the sign of the infinity. And my dad has infinite energy and creativity because he draws that from his muse. And one of the things that I wanted to express on behalf of us children is that our father is our father first before he is the maker of things. And so that's why I wanted to speak on behalf of all of us. For us, there are 2 things that come to us when we think about Dad. We think about fun, creativity, and curiosity. And so the earliest memories that all of us share with Dad is how much fun it was to grow up with him. He was always ready for an adventure, and he always included us in the things that he was doing. He also respected us deeply as little human beings. He did characterize us as anarchists. He says that little children are natural anarchists, and the challenge becomes channeling that anarchy into something that's productive. And he was masterful at that, because we got up to a lot of hijinks, and Dad was there to kind of shape and mold the things that we did. Some of the early memories we have, for example, would be things like if Dad was painting in his studio, which was basically the second big living room that we had, there was always fresh paint to touch and explore. So we were always saying, well, Dad makes this look really easy. So we're gonna, there's some wet paint that's here. So let's just have a go at it. And we would add our little 3 cents to some paintings, some of which Dad was able to see, some of which, I think we became so skillful that he did not pick up that we actually added a lot more than he could pick up in those paintings. So there are a lot of co-authors of Dad's paintings that are shared in many collections. So sorry to break that to you all. It's not 100% Stanley Greaves for some of those paintings. That will remain a secret. So that's one thing. The other thing was, no matter what exercise we had to do, we could always count on Dad to help us. So whether it be a school project, if it were, we were knitting something or doing needlepoint, we were drawing or painting, sculpting, whatever it was, Dad was there to help us. I remember there was a time when we were little that we decided we were going to make ourselves a whole series of animals out of the mud from the yard. And so we were, my sisters and I were sculpting, these mud sculptures, and we would put them on the steps to dry. And sometimes they would stay upright, sometimes they wouldn't, sometimes they would collapse. And so that helped us figure out what it is we needed to do with that mud that came straight from the yard, so that when we created these little figures to dry on the steps to play with later on, they would actually stay standing. So he showed us methods in all the different modalities that he's skilled in, and allowed us to be very confident in the things that we were actually able to create. So it was really a lot of fun to be with Dad. He took us everywhere. We did have one standing rule, which was when we went out, especially on Saturdays, because it was just too much fun to go to the market and too much fun to go to the museum and hear about all these different things, that we didn't want Dad to stop and speak to either artists or musicians. It's like, Dad, we're going out today and we have a whole agenda of places we'd like to go, and then we know your game, but no artists, no musicians. Well, it never worked. Invariably, you would hear, hey, Stanley. It's like, oh no, here comes Uncle Philip, here comes Uncle Mac, here comes all these, oh, here comes Uncle Dennis Williams. It's like, oh no, here we go with these uncles. They talk long. So it's like, Dad, come on, we have to go. But we always enjoyed our uncles. Another memory we have of Uncle Mac was that Dad and Uncle Mac, would have a lot of fun, hanging out together, playing drums, singing folk songs. And as it got livelier and livelier, because there was some rum involved, then Uncle Mac, and Dad would keep singing and drumming, and he would invite us to dance. We were taking dance classes at the National Dance School with the professor from Cuba. And so we would dance, and Uncle Mac would give us a bob, 25 cents if we did really well. So that was great fun. Throughout the years, as we left and came to America, Dad would write us beautiful letters. We'd write him back, and he always, gave us presents of his work. So we carried that work with us to university. It was always there, hanging over our desk as we studied to get, to get our degrees and to accomplish some of the goals that we had in our lives. He always was there in terms of allowing us to really focus on developing our own sense of self. So what that meant is what Aubrey had mentioned before, looking inward and understanding that, creative expression actually comes from within when we connect to that muse. And some of us, will call that muse God. Some of us will just, call it, eternal spirit or the universe. But what it taught us all is that our inner life mattered, that every person was unique and important. Every person mattered. And every person had their own unique gifts and skills that you could draw out if you came to them with your authentic self. And it meant that we've had incredible experiences with people that we've met and had some really profound friendships along the way, ourselves. And all that we learned from looking at Dad and seeing how he managed or enjoyed his friendships with, a vast variety of people. And he continues to this day to meet and explore and enjoy friendships with people from all over the world. That has also been very welcoming and wonderful, nurturing to our children. So we get to enjoy the shenanigans all over again, through our children. He's wonderful at encouraging them to look after their unique gifts. My children have special needs, and Dad has been able to help me understand them through the way in which he interacted with us, recognizing their sense of self, recognizing their value, and recognizing that they too have things to say, and they too have experiences that they would like to enjoy in the world. So it's just really wonderful that all of you took time to come and celebrate Dad with us. I know that he enjoys his conversations with all of you. Because when we call, he said, oh yeah, I spoke to so-and-so today, we had a good time, speaking about this or that, or, oh, that reminds me, I have to call this person, I have to write this person, so your experiences with him enriches him and allows him to be his best self. So please continue, but just know that if you don't hear from him, it's because there's so many people coming through to spend time. And like he says, oh, I got to play my guitar, or it's time to make some soup or things like that. So, the creative expression still continues no matter what experience he has. I really love the food pictures that Joe showed, because whenever I come, Dad says, oh, what are we making this time? And he always has something he wants us to make together. So we had that experiment of making bread together. Joe, you had one of those pictures in there, and that was great fun. Dad ended up trying it on his own, and it became a sculpture because something happened along the way. So now it became a sculpture in homage of his mother, my grandmother, who would send him to the baker shop. She would make bread, he would take it over on a tray, they would bake it, and then he would return to pick up the bread. But he did say that you had to return on time, because sometimes when the bread came out of the oven, people would take the best bread, and you would end up going home with a bread that's not your mother's. So he learned pretty early on to make sure that he was there to collect the bread that his mother had actually sent him to the bakers with. But all in all, I just want to say that for us, my dad, my mom, very, very treasured people. The two of them together were very disciplined in terms of what they thought, what they believed. They were also my mom passed away, so that's why I said was. Both of them have instilled in us the sense of compassion, of reaching out to others, understanding that we share one body, one mind, through all the different iterations of people that come through our world and that we experience. And it is definitely a gift having grown up in Guyana and enjoying the different experiences, the different cultures, and the melting pot that Guyana actually is. And I hope that for all of us Guyanese who are here on the call and people who love Guyana, that we continue to support the development of Guyana and stay involved, so that it really becomes, that El Dorado that we know and love so well. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for sharing Dad's life with him. Thank you for allowing us to have this tribute to Dad. It's wonderful to celebrate his 80th birthday, and I hope to see you guys at 90 and 95 and 100
and 200
and wherever we go, because I think it's going to be a long, fabulous journey. Thank you so much, Rod and Juanita.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm
Thank you.
going to, first of all, just to say, I'm going to switch off the recording shortly so we can, for those who want to carry on talking, that'll be fine. But just I wanted to formally end the recording now and say thank you so much to everyone who contributed. Everybody, of course, jumped to the opportunity to talk about Stanley and to be part of this event. And it's just been really wonderful listening to all the stories everyone's shared. So thank you. And I'm now switching off the recording.
That